What is going on, guys? This is Earpugs, and in this video I'm going to be covering why PvP in Wrath of the Lich King is much more difficult than it is in the Burning Crusade. The most obvious reason why the difficulty increases for Wrath PvP is the fact that every class gets very strong new abilities. This forces you to understand how they function, as well as learn how to counter them correctly. On top of that, it adds a lot of depth to the game, giving each class more chances to actually survive and generate pressure. Let's take a quick look at what each class gets going into Wrath of the Lich King Arena that should be paid attention to. Starting off with a brand new class, we have the Death Knight. Icebound Fortitude is a very strong cooldown that they have. This is a defensive that reduces all damage taken by 30% while also making them immune to every stun in the game for 12 seconds. Another ability is Anti-Magic Shell. This is very strong versus casters since it is a 5-second immunity to all spells on a 45-second cooldown. They have a 4-second interrupt on a 10-second cooldown, just like a Rogue's Kick, except it is a spell, so it can actually be grounded by a Shaman. They have a 5-second silence, which is called Strangulate. This is actually dispellable since it is a magic effect. And lastly, they have Lichborn, which makes them classified as undead for 10 seconds, making them immune to fear, charm, and sleep effects. This also has a second use since it can be used to prevent them from being polymorphed or sapped, because you cannot use either of those abilities on the undead. However, if you do Lichborn, paladins can use Turn Evil on you, as well as priests being able to shackle you. You can of course take off Lichborn at any time with a cancel aura macro. As far as Unholy Death Knights go, there are a few things to track. The absolute most important ability that an Unholy Death Knight has is Summon Gargoyle. When used, a gargoyle flies out of the sky and starts constantly throwing damage into whichever target the Death Knight chose. This is one of the hardest hitting cooldowns in the game, so make sure that you are either line of sighting the gargoyle or crowd controlling it in some way. If you let the gargoyle free cast for its full duration, then it's very likely that somebody can die. It is undead, so you can use Shackle Undead or Turn Evil on it. Even Warlocks using Curse of Tongues will help reduce its damage by quite a lot. Unholy also gets Desecration, which is an AoE slow on the ground very similar to Frost Trap. This is non-dispellable and happens anytime the DK uses their basic rotation. The only way to counter this is to either leave the ring or to get freedomed out of it. The other specialization that you will see a Death Knight play is Frost. This spec has a lot of raw damage and only one cooldown that's important to track. Hungering Cold is a 1-minute CD that will freeze everyone near the Death Knight for 10 seconds. Most Death Knights will be using this off cooldown to generate a lot of pressure. Make sure that you don't waste your trinket against this, because every minute the Death Knight will be using this off cooldown. Moving on to Druids, and starting out with the Boomkin, this spec is now very scary when it pops its cooldowns, and you need to be aware of how they operate. Boomkins essentially act as turrets, seeing as they need to be casting Wraths or Starfire to be effective in tandem with Cyclone. If you prevent a Boomkin from casting, they really don't do very much damage and aren't very scary. However, if you leave them alone, they can pretty much solo somebody by themselves. The single most important cooldown they have is called Starfall. When this is popped, they will begin raining stars on every target within 30 yards. Be aware that crowd controlling the Boomkin with anything but a silence will actually prevent the stars from falling. If you do not stop the Starfall and let them channel it fully while also casting, it is 100% guaranteed that they are going to kill someone, seeing as it is absolutely unhealable damage. They also get an AoE knockback called Typhoon. This is an instant cast ability that will knock back anyone who is in front of it in a cone. It can be used to knock people off the bridge on Blade's Edge, or the ledges on Dollar End Sewers, and in battlegrounds, etc. Ferals are up next. If you thought TBC Ferals did damage, then think again, because Ferals have one of the highest bursts in the entire game in Wrath of the Lich King. This is thanks to a cooldown they have called Berserk. When activated, their abilities cost half energy, and they also become immune to fear. I have personally seen a Feral 100-0 somebody in 5 seconds with Berserk up and full energy, so do not think that Berserk is a cooldown that can be ignored. They also get Predator Swiftness. This allows them to get an instant cast after they use a 5-point finishing move. The takeaway from this is that every time they use their combo points, they will be cycloning another target to generate pressure. Be aware that Predator Swiftness is dispellable, so if you see a Druid holding on to it for a long time, you can actually dispel it off of them before they use it. Ferals are fairly squishy, however, so if you force them to go defensive and have to play in bear form, then they really won't be doing much since they can't generate any combo points in that form and also do minimal damage. Hunters are up next, and holy moly do they get a whole bunch of new abilities. Deterrence now deflects all incoming damage for 5 seconds. Freezing Trap can now be shot across the arena. Their pet has a Hand of Freedom on a 1-minute cooldown for themselves or their teammates. They can disengage away, allowing them to shoot backwards a short distance. Their pet has an Intervene just like a warrior, as well as having a big damage reduction cooldown called Roar of Sacrifice. But wait, because of their marksmanship, they actually get Readiness, which will reset every single cooldown that the hunter has. The two biggest downsides for the hunter is that you can actually eat their traps by standing on them when they try to trap your healer or DPS, as well as them being fairly squishy and easy to kill. Be aware that hunters cannot use the ability Deterrence if they're disarmed, so it's a very good idea to disarm them when they're about to use it. Warriors can also use Overpower and hit right through this ability. Up next is the Mage. They are similar to their TBC form, except now they have a ton of spell haste as well as mirror images. When they pop this, 3 copies of themselves will spawn and start casting into whoever the mage is hitting, giving them extra damage. Frost mages now pick up Deep Freeze. This is a huge ability that has many purposes. It is a 5-second stun that also increases their frost damage on the target significantly. Be aware that they can Cold Snap and have this cooldown instantly reset, allowing them to double Deep Freeze in certain situations. Mages are, however, extremely squishy in Wrath of the Lich King, and if you are able to connect to a mage, their death is almost guaranteed. Fire mages are now going to be much more common than they were in TBC. They have a very powerful CC called Dragon's Breath. This is an AoE disorient that affects every target in front of the mage. Do not stack your team against a fire mage ever, because they will likely just Dragon's Breath all of you and then get free CC chains off of it as well as a bunch of damage. They can also knock people off ledges with Blast Wave, which is an AoE knockback. This is very good for Blades Arena as well as Dalaran Sewers. Looks like Paladins are up next. Now, they don't really have a ton of new things to track. However, there is a few that shouldn't be ignored. Sacred Shield is a brand new ability and arguably the strongest offensive in the entire game, seeing as it essentially puts a regenerating power word shield on any target that the Paladin chooses with no cooldown. This can only be applied to one target at a time and is dispellable. Paladins will try to have this up 24/7, seeing as it is the best consistent damage mitigation in the game. Dispelling this does force the Paladin to spam reapply this, which not only puts your team ahead, but also puts theirs behind. They now have 2 different versions of Sacrifice. The first one is Hand of Sacrifice, which is what Blessing of Sacrifice gets turned into. This ability will transfer 30% of all damage taken on the target to the Paladin. Not only does this reduce damage on the target by a large margin, it also prevents the Paladin from being in any kind of a CC that breaks on damage, seeing as it will be transferring 30% of the damage to the Paladin. This is dispellable, so make sure that you are taking it off instantly if you are able to. The second version of Sacrifice they have is called Divine Sacrifice. This is a brand new ability that acts similarly to Hand of Sacrifice, except it actually goes on the entire team and is non-dispellable, making it extremely powerful. And that about does it for the Paladin. We are now moving on to the Rogue. The most common specialization that you will see a Rogue play in Arena is the Subtlety Rogue. The biggest thing that they get is Shadow Dance. This is a 1-minute cooldown that allows them to use their stealth abilities while out of stealth. They can sap anybody who is out of combat, as well as using Ambush, Cheap Shot, Garrote, etc. This is by far Subtlety's biggest cooldown that they rely on, so make sure that you are aware of when the rogue is going to be using it. Subtlety rogues have very low sustain damage, but extremely high burst damage. Tricks of the Trade is a new ability that will boost their party members' damage for a short time. If you see a rogue pop this, know that they are likely trying to either land a kill or generate big pressure. The last important cooldown to track for rogues is only if they're spec'd into the combat tree. Killing Spree is a brand new ability that will be very popular for the early parts of Season 5. This is a 2-minute cooldown that, when activated, has them attack you every half second with both weapons until 5 attacks are made. This hits for a significantly high amount of damage in an extremely short amount of time. However, something to know is that once the rogue hits Killing Spree, they no longer have control over their character, and if you are actually able to stack with your teammate, it will split the damage between you. Looks like Shamans are up next. They can now drop 4 totems at once, as well as shielding themselves with the glyph of Stoneclaw Totem. They also have Wind Shear. This is an ability with a 6-second cooldown that, when used, interrupts a cast for 2 seconds. This is honestly an extremely challenging ability to play around, seeing as every 6 seconds, the Shaman is going to be stopping someone's casts, not to mention the fact that they also have a grounding totem. Resto Shamans now have Riptide, giving them a very nice instant cast heal that not only heals a target, but also applies a healing over time effect. Earth Shield has now been changed. In the Burning Crusade, if you use Dispel Magic on an Earth Shield or Purge, it would actually remove the entire buff, including all of the charges. This is now different in Wrath of the Lich King. If you purge or dispel an Earth Shield, it will actually only remove a charge or two off of that Earth Shield instead of removing the entire buff. This makes spamming Dispel into an Earth Shield not really worth it. All Shamans now get Lava Burst, however it is only important to track this ability if it's being used by an Elemental Shaman. This ability is one of the hardest hitting casts in the entire game, and when combined with Chain Lightning has the potential to one-shot somebody. Always be tracking what the Elemental Shaman is casting, and if you see them casting this, make sure you stop it, otherwise it's highly likely that somebody can die. Another big buff that Elemental Shamans get is that their Earthbind totem now roots all nearby targets for 5 seconds. Lastly, one of their most famous abilities they pick up in Wrath is Thunderstorm. This is the strongest knockback in the game, seeing as it absolutely catapults anyone who is near the Shaman. They will be looking to use this ability off cooldown, so make sure that you are always positioned in a way where you're not going to get launched into a bad spot. The last spec for Shamans is Enhancement. This spec gets quite a lot of buffs going into Wrath, making it a very serious threat. They now have Spirit Wolves, which not only heal them, but also do damage to whoever they are hitting and have abilities. Escaping these wolves is all but impossible since they are able to leap to their target as well as stun them. The wolves also give the Shaman an ability to break out of any movement and pairing effects, while also increasing the Shaman's speed and the wolf's speed by 60% for 15 seconds. If you are able to kill the Shaman's wolves, it is very recommended to do so, seeing as if they last their full duration, it will be very difficult to deal with them. However, this is easier said than done, and much easier for melees. Moving on to the Warlock, this class gets a fairly large rework in terms of how it plays. They are no longer very tanky, as well as going fully into their spec trees. All Warlocks now have a portal, which lasts for 6 minutes and allows them to teleport to it from anywhere within 40 yards on a 30-second cooldown. Be aware that a Warlock will almost always be making you choose a bad position by putting their portal max range from them, and the moment they get into trouble are able to port. If you ever chase a Warlock off a ledge, it's highly likely that they simply port back up the second you jump and you are now hitting nobody. Their pets also no longer have insane resistances and can actually die to casters now. Affliction gets a big rework. They now rely very heavily on casting, since they need to have unstable affliction on multiple targets to be effective. If you are able to stop a Warlock from getting unstable affliction out, it's very likely that your team is going to pull ahead, since they're not going to have very much pressure. They also pick up an instant Howl of Terror, which acts the same as a Priest Sphere. Be aware that Howl of Terror and their single target Fear can be used in tandem, so it's not uncommon to see an Affliction lock fear an entire team by themselves. Destruction is up next. The number one most important thing that needs to be understood about this spec is that they absolutely have to cast Chaos Bolt to do damage and be effective. They also need to have Immolate up. This is because when a Warlock puts an Immolate on a target, they can use Conflagurate, which is an instant cast ability to consume it for damage, while also using this right after they cast their Chaos Bolt. They also picked up Shadow Fury, which is an instant cast AoE stun for 3 seconds. On top of this, they will usually run the Succubus pet, allowing them to Shadow Fury, cast Seduction on one target, and then Fear another one to give them a very good opener. The Succubus pet is extremely important to the Destruction Warlock because it makes space for them by using Seduction. If you are able to kill this pet, it is very, very bad for the Warlock, seeing as that's one less thing that they can use to get you off of them. If you are able to sit on a Destruction Warlock and prevent them from ever casting their Chaos Bolt and Immolate, they will literally do 0 damage, so it is very, very important that you lock them down. The last spec that you will see a Warlock play, which is a pretty memey spec and will likely only be used in Season 5, is Demonology. The reason that it's good in the first season of Wrath is because people have very low amounts of resilience, and Metamorphosis hits for a lot of damage if you're able to line up your abilities properly. It has a 30-second duration as well as a decent cooldown, so as long as you're able to live through the Metamorphosis, you should be good. Last but not least, we have a very scary class when played correctly, which is the Warrior. This class gets a ton of changes going from TBC to Wotlk. The two main specs that you will see in PvP is Arms and Protection. We will be starting off with the most played version, which is Arms. They can now charge in combat as well as intercept and intervene, giving them 3 separate gap closers to get around the arena. They also pick up a very strong ability, which is called Blade Storm. When used in tandem with Sweeping Strikes, this ability will absolutely demolish any targets that are near the Warrior. Be aware that the only way to stop this ability is by disarming the Warrior. No other form of CC will stop them. Luckily, many classes can disarm now. Shadow Priests have Psychic Horror, Rogues have Dismantle, Warriors have Disarm, Fire Mages have an RNG Disarm, and Hunters can use Chimera Shot with a Sting to disarm. Arms Warriors also have probably the strongest offensive ability in the entire game, which is called Unrelenting Assault. This is the only stackable Mortal Strike effect in the entire game. If a healer is casting an ability and a warrior overpowers them on the cast, it applies this debuff, which also stacks with MS, reducing the healing done by 75% to themselves. It is very important to not get this debuff on you, seeing as if you do, your heals are basically worthless. Warriors can also now use Shield Wall, Recklessness, and Retaliation in Arena. A quick synopsis on these abilities is that Shield Wall is their biggest offensive, reducing all incoming damage by a massive 60%, Recklessness making them immune to fear, as well as guaranteeing their next 3 special abilities to critically strike, but also increasing their damage taken by 20%. And lastly, Retaliation is actually one of the strongest defensives and offensives in the entire game versus melees. When activated, it will instantly auto-attack an enemy every time they auto-attack you with 20 charges. Since Arms Warriors use a two-handed weapon that hits extremely hard, this is a very strong ability. If you are a melee and attack into a warrior's retaliation, it is extremely possible for you to get 100 0'd in a matter of seconds. I have personally killed rogues from full health to 0 in 3 globals with retal since rogues attack so quickly. They also get enraged regeneration, which allows them to regenerate 30% of their total health over 10 seconds. And last but not least, we have the Protection Warrior. This spec actually has a pretty high amount of burst damage while also having a lot of stuns and silences. They are more mobile than Arms Warriors since they don't need to swap stances to charge, intercept, or intervene. On top of that, their intervene also removes them out of any movement impairing effects. While they don't have a Mortal Strike effect, they do have a decent amount of utility. However, if they have no stuns left, then their damage is pretty manageable. The only time Prot Warriors are able to demolish targets is at the end of the expansion if they have a full armor pen set giving them 100% armor penetration. Be aware that most Prot Warriors don't actually wear any PvP gear, so casters can pretty much delete them since they have little to no resilience. They also pick up improved spell reflection. This actually makes it so when they use spell reflect, it goes on their teammates as well, allowing them to actually reflect things that are cast on their teammates back at the caster. So always be tracking spell reflect against a Prot Warrior even if you're casting at their teammates. Combining all of these with the resilience buff and generally less RNG damage than TBC has, Wrath of the Lich King Arena has its skill cap increased by a ton. It is definitely very overwhelming at first, but the more you play, the more you will get the hang of it. Wrath is the best version of WoW Arena that has ever been released in my opinion. Liking the video helps me out immensely. Thank you very much for watching, and we will see you guys in the next video.